Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. What do we do about sex after a vasectomy or some other form of permanent sterilization when it was done before we fully understood the Catholic Church teaching on it, and now we're understanding everything and we still have this very real situation in our marriage? Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I'm a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy. And I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. So today, I am answering a question that I got from a listener about vasectomies. And the question is really particular. There's a lot on vasectomies, and I'm only going to be answering this particular area of vasectomies in this episode, and maybe I will do a future episode answering more questions on vasectomies and other forms of permanent sterilization and the moral things that are all wrapped up in that. But this is the question I'm answering for this episode. The question is, before we knew much about the Catholic faith, my husband got a vasectomy. We have 3 daughters, and we were happy with just having 3. After restarting my faith journey and learning more about the Catholic faith, I realized that was wrong. My husband and I both took this to confession, and we were forgiven for this sin, but it still bothers me. I'm really struggling with this now. So here's my question. Is the sex we are having now wrong? We are coming together in unity. There is penetration, but there isn't that possibility of procreation. Are we sinning? Is this sexual act now morally wrong? All right. So for the super simple answer to this is no. When we bring a sin to confession, we are fully forgiven and fully restored to God's grace, given that we are fully repentant of that sin, right? So if you have brought this sin of getting a vasectomy or possibly some other form of permanent sterilization, you have brought this sin to confession, you have received God's forgiveness, you have received grace, His grace, and you are restored to His grace. There is nothing morally wrong with now having sex after that. The Catholic Church does not require a couple to then seek out reversal of permanent sterilization after the sin has been confessed. And that's for a number of reasons, but some of the bigger ones are just because sometimes it's not at all possible. Sometimes it can actually be really harmful, especially age or some other medical condition, something underlying can make that impossible. Or it can be cost prohibitive for the couple. And so the Catholic Church doesn't actually require a couple to seek that out. Now, I think that a lot of couples would really benefit from seeking that out, just for your own heart. And sometimes that might just mean doing the research to figure out if it even is possible, or even making it a goal. Let's say that it's very cost prohibitive to do the reversal surgery and you don't have that kind of money. Doing that research, finding out what the number is, and then deciding, hey, do we want to save up for that? That can be very healing to you. So now that we've kind of answered the question, I want to dig in just a little bit more into why do we have, after this vasectomy has happened, why do we still have this very uncomfortable feeling? And I think there's kind of 2 big things here. One is, I think a lot of the time we're not fully trusting in God's grace and His mercy. We don't actually believe we're forgiven. And so if that is the case, if we are feeling uncomfortable about having sex post-vasectomy, post-confession, and we know it's not a sin, but we're feeling very uncomfortable about it, we need to really sit down and ask ourselves, do I actually believe that God has forgiven me? Do I actually believe that this sin has been wiped away from me, or am I holding back? Have I not forgiven myself? Because when we don't forgive ourselves, that is us saying, oh God, nope, there's no way that you could have forgiven me because I can't even forgive myself. That is telling God that He couldn't possibly forgive us for this sin. So we need to really look very seriously at that. And maybe we need to head back to confession, not to confess the sin of the vasectomy. We've already confessed that sin, but to confess the sin of not trusting in God's grace and not actually receiving His forgiveness. And then the other area where we still might feel very uncomfortable about this is the very real effect of sin. the very real and permanent effect of sin, right? And this is a great example, but this actually applies to all sin. There's no such thing as private sin. There's no such thing as sin that doesn't have an effect. Now, with a vasectomy, right, there is a very clear, permanent physical effect that happens from a vasectomy. The sin has been wiped clean after you've gone to confession, but the vasectomy still exists. Like after confession, the vasectomy doesn't just like go away, right? That is very real. All sin has that. And it is okay to mourn that loss of what was supposed to be, what is supposed to be in the natural order. It's okay to mourn that after sin. And so we might just be experiencing that very real, very painful effect that sin has. And we see this throughout salvation history. When God makes a covenant with his people and his people break that covenant, we break the covenant, and then he restores the covenant, but the covenant's different now. There are more rules. There are more regulations. There are stricter settings applied to the covenant. And this is where we kind of get, we get this, like, we get the 10 Commandments, but then later there's like all the laws of Leviticus. Another place that we can like see this change is like, if you think about the kosher laws, like they were about what kinds of things you can eat, what animals were clean and what animals were unclean. And like, you can't have dairy products served with meat products at the same meal. These kosher laws came like after a couple iterations of covenant that were like broken and then restored by God, broken by humans, restored by God. God never broke the covenant. And we know that like these kosher laws didn't always exist because if we go back to Abraham's hospitality, when Abraham met the three men, the three figures, the three angels, and he served them a meal, that meal was not kosher, right? But Abraham was like the father of the Jewish faith, right? The Jewish faith was not always the Jewish faith with all the kosher laws. That's part of salvation history, that God fully restored his people into covenant with him, but he had to set clearer guidelines. Things had to change because the very real effect of breaking the covenant like caused a need to make changes to the covenant. So that is, I think, a lot of times what we're experiencing with this difficulty after vasectomy, this difficulty with sex, because there's a very real truth that sex is no longer physically procreative, right? There is not sperm in the semen. There is still an ejaculate material, but there's no sperm in it because they cut the like lines that allowed for the sperm to travel. And so that is something that, again, I think a lot of times we can work toward healing in that, in seeking out what would the requirements of like reversing this be? What is the possibility here? Like, and again, sometimes just that research can be very, very healing and very cathartic for this situation, and just finding out if it even is possible. But ultimately, it's God. It's God's grace. It's God's healing that is going to help us overcome this. And so this is where we just need to run to God and say, wow, we like really messed up and we're still feeling the effects of this. And God, I am so sorry for this, right? We can just continue to apologize for it. And God can just be there and say, yeah, I love you. I know that you sinned, but I love you and I've forgiven you for that sin. And so just really bringing this to prayer, bringing it to adoration is phenomenal, as an intention for mass. Maybe one of your masses per month, you just like bring this intention of this like difficulty that you have, with sex post vasectomy, and just like continue to work through that with God. Jesus wants to just give you a big, huge hug. He is so overjoyed that you've returned to the Catholic faith and that you have confessed the sin. And he just wants you to like give everything of yourself to him. And when we're like, when we get like stuck in this and we're like so confused and worried and frustrated and just don't really know, we're holding back part of ourselves. And so if we can just turn to God and give everything to him, particularly in this, and just recognizing our brokenness. I mean, it's just such a clear symbol of brokenness, and such a clear image of like salvation history overall, right? So we can allow this image to then like inform our own study of salvation history, and and read through the Old Testament and see how this is exactly the same, how this is so similar to how the covenant had to change, and all of those kinds of things. But just remember, it is all God's grace. It is all God's grace. Thanks so much for listening. If you're ready to stop feeling confused or discouraged about sex and finally understand how God designed your body for real, beautiful pleasure, you need to check out the Orgasm Course for Catholic Women. I'll teach you the tools and the mindset you need to experience the intimacy you were made for, all deeply rooted in Catholic Church teaching. Head over to vinesandfullbloom.com/orgasm, and I'll see you inside.